Everyone, welcome back to the Looking Good Sports Podcast for March 7th, 2025. I'm your host, Brian Maher, and I'm very excited to get into another jam-packed show. With the NFL offseason in full swing, moves are happening left and right. We're going to focus on that for this episode, so no guests. Stuck with me on this lovely Friday afternoon. It's quite cold and windy where I live. Hopefully the weather is a little bit better for you, wherever you are. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. I want to start off with a reading of one of the blogs on the WickedGoodEverythingSports.com blog. This one about the Bengals tagging Tee Higgins again, which I find very lame. So, the Cincinnati Bengals are in win now mode, with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase locked up for the long term with hefty contracts. They are once again in a precarious position with their other young star, Tee Higgins. Higgins will be headed into his sixth season with the Bengals in 2025 and has compiled a stat line of 330 receptions, 4,595 yards, and 34 touchdowns during that period as a second option to Jamar Chase. As Higgins was a second-round pick, his initial contract was only 4 seasons, covering 2020 to 2023, with no fifth-year option. So, in 2024, the Bengals decided to franchise tag their young star for $20.6 million. He would only appear in 12 games, posting a stat line of 73 receptions, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns. 10 touchdowns were a career high. Still, it was clear that Higgins wanted a long-term contract. Quarterback Joe Burrow used his appearances during Super Bowl week to reiterate that he would like to keep the team together for 2025, telling Maurice Jones-Drew on NFL Network's Super Bowl Live, quote, "We're confident that we're going to be able to do what it takes. We all want to stay together, so we want to make it work," close quote. The team made their first move to try to make it work by tagging Higgins again, though he didn't seem enthusiastic when he announced it on X, saying only tag with a period. The period punctuating the single word seems to speak to his displeasure. Similarly, Jamar Chase tagged Higgins on Instagram in a story of a picture with Joe Burrow with a furrowed brow and a gif of a man saying, "What?" again, seemingly indicating that the second consecutive year of a franchise tag wasn't what the trio were hoping for. The latest on the tagging is that the team will attempt to reach a long-term deal with Higgins. The tag is only in place to make those conversations exclusive. Had he been allowed to test free agency, it's likely that a team like, say, the Patriots, who have a lot of money to spend, would have offered him more than the Bengals could afford. Though this does bring up the conversation about fairness of tagging a player in consecutive years. Well, the NFL does try to make it so that the player is taken care of financially, with the second tag being 120% of the value of the first. In this case, Higgins will make $26.2 million. Should he suffer a serious injury, he will be out of luck next offseason. For this reason, players like Le'Veon Bell have missed entire seasons in order to force an organization's hand to up the guaranteed money. We can argue about if Bell was right in sitting out, if he would have made more money had he played, but the fact is he turned down $14.5 million and eventually got $35 million guaranteed from the New York Jets. Had he played and been significantly injured, he would have perhaps only made that initial $14.5 million. So we'll have to wait and see if Higgins signs his franchise tag or tries to force the organization to pay him what he's earned. As frustrating as it would be as a Bengals fan, should Higgins play hardball, it seems he has the support of his teammates in Chase and Burrow, which should serve to help him at the negotiation table. Personally, I think a player should be allowed. I think a player should not be allowed to be tagged in consecutive years due to the brutality inherent to the sport. But I'm just a blogger, or I guess in this instance, a YouTuber. So what are your thoughts on the franchise tag and Tee Higgins situation? So yeah, that was mostly just to voice my thoughts. I don't know if displeasure is the right word, but I do believe that not allowing a player to leave for one season with a franchise tag, that makes sense. Whether you want to try to get a longer contract in that season, that's of course up to the discretion of a team, or if you just want to hang him up, keep his cleats, his jersey in the locker room for that one season, that's up to the team. But I think it starts getting tricky when players have like very little bargaining power in this instance, and really the only thing they can do to leverage the situation to their benefit at all is sit out. And then that gets fans very upset, and that kind of gives the power back to the NFL owners. And obviously, they're all millionaires, and the owners are billionaires. So I get why it's like, well, I would play for that 26 million dollars. Sure, but I do think it's like self-defeating to potentially call out a fellow, worker in the hierarchy of bosses being the owners and workers being the players, and say that just because this worker is making a lot, that they shouldn't perhaps earn what they're due. So that's where I fall on it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think it's like, oh well, they make so much money, who cares? But you know, I don't agree with that, obviously. But please let me know your thoughts in the comments. So Myles Garrett, he is requesting a trade from Cleveland. We went over this when it first was announced, and I thought, honestly, it'd be this kind of situation where the Browns would be like, look, this sucks for us, but you've given us so much that we will try to trade you. But Tom Pelissero reported on Blue Sky that Brown star Myles Garrett recently requested a meeting with owner Jimmy Haslam, who's declined to speak amidst Garrett's trade request per sources. Cleveland refuses to even discuss a trade, while Garrett is prepping to miss games if he is not traded. So, what do you do normally when a star player is disgruntled as an NFL owner? Well, usually star players are disgruntled because they're not making as much money as they believe that they should be. So oftentimes this can be remedied simply by providing a raise, more guaranteed money, changing up the contract for the star player. We saw this a lot, as a Dolphins fan with Xavier Howard, who was initially given the biggest contract for cornerbacks in the league. And then when he would get passed by other players, the Dolphins would often sweeten the deal in order to keep their star cornerback happy. So that's what I'm sure at some point Jimmy Haslam, the Browns owners, were thinking would be all that needed to be done to keep Myles Garrett in town. However, he made clear in his statement that this is not a move about money for Myles Garrett. This is a move about trying to win a Super Bowl, something that he does not believe the Cleveland Browns are capable of at this point. And I am inclined to agree with him. They are in such a bad situation with Deshaun Watson as their quarterback, who just tore his Achilles again, and then had his contract reworked to try to free up some space for the Browns to probably try to get another quarterback, whether that's through the draft or through free agency. But needless to say, that giant contract, even as it's been renegotiated, has caused issues for the Cleveland Browns, and it still does. So the talent that the Browns are able to get outside of the quarterback situation, which, if you've been watching, he hasn't been that talented since he's gone to Cleveland, is not as good as it possibly could be, with the exceptions of players like Myles Garrett, who is, of course, an all-pro defensive player of the year and just an all-around incredibly talented individual. So I see where he is probably looking at this team and thinking, there's just no way this team is going to seriously compete for a Super Bowl before my career is over. He's already like 30 years old, and he's just thinking like, I need to get out of Cleveland. As much as I loved it, as dominant as I've been, and if I stayed here, I probably would become a Hall of Famer. I'd become a Hall of Famer in a similar way to like Joe Thomas, right? Who stayed his entire career in Cleveland, was the best left tackle pretty much his entire career, and he never made the playoffs. He has nothing to show for it in terms of on the field accomplishments with the team. He has tons of personal accolades, as does Garrett, and he has a Hall of Fame jacket, as probably will Garrett. But I can also see why the Browns would be disinclined to go with Garrett's, request here, because obviously they have no leverage now. Any team that they're negotiating with knows that he has requested a trade. He wants to leave, and so the negotiating power lies with the teams that the Browns are trying to negotiate with. So I would imagine this is why Jimmy Haslam is quite upset. He doesn't want to lose Myles Garrett. Why would you? Great player. And if he's going to lose Myles Garrett, he knows that he's going to have to take somewhat of a loss on trading Myles Garrett. And for that reason, he doesn't want to meet with Myles Garrett at all, which I do think is childish. But I do see why he would be upset about the situation. Granted, I can also see why Myles Garrett might be upset with the situation in Cleveland for himself as a player who has put his blood, sweat, tears, and accomplished so much for the team without ownership and coaches being good enough to get the team to accomplish much as a team. So, very interesting situation developing in Cleveland. Will this get so far out of hand that Garrett straight up misses games? And then would even that be enough for the Browns and Jimmy Haslam to change his mind and attempt to trade him? We shall see what happens there, but I'd love to know your thoughts about this entire situation in the comments. So finally, this was kind of a surprising piece of news to me, who maybe, hasn't been paying as much attention, right, to a team like the Los Angeles Chargers. So the Los Angeles Chargers have released Joey Bosa. That's right, the 2016 third overall pick was drafted by, at the time, San Diego Chargers, but now the Los Angeles Chargers, and has won NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's been a 5-time Pro Bowler, including this last year. And he has just been an all-around really solid player for the Chargers, compiling 72 sacks, 343 tackles, 17 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, and 3 pass deflections. However, this last string of 3 years, not as great. He started out about as hot as you can get, right? 2016, 10.5 sacks. 2017, 12.5. 2018, he was hurt, 5.5. But then he came back in 2019, had 11.5. Then in 2020, 7.5. Again, injuries. 2021 plays a full season, 10.5. But then 2022 only played 5 games and got 2.5 sacks. 2023, 6.5 sacks in 9 games played, 5 started. And then last year, 5 sacks in 14 games with 9 started. So obviously a player who's very talented and who has somewhat dropped off in recent years. And I can see why the Chargers were kind of ready to move on, right? He has been such a good player, but it's probably over for him as, a premier defensive end. I think he could definitely provide value as a rotational guy. But at this point, it just didn't make sense for the Los Angeles Chargers to keep him around, given, his contract versus his production. But that does bring up a very interesting point, right? Where could Joey Bosa go? Well, his brother, Nick Bosa, the second overall pick in the 2019 draft, who's been the Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, Defensive Rookie of the Year, much like his brother in 2029, a first-team All-Pro in 2022, 5-time Pro Bowler, has 62.5 sacks, 261 tackles, 11 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 2 interceptions, and 9 passes defended, is just down the road. Nah, just a little farther. And it's also up the road, I guess. Oh, that'd be from San Diego. Across the bay to San Francisco. A short flight, we'll say that, to San Francisco. So, can we see the Bosa brothers together in San Francisco? I think, honestly, that's what's going to happen. And I think Joey Bosa would probably be open to potentially taking a bit of a pay cut in order to stay, or I guess get the opportunity to play with his brother, to be there. And then that'd be a very interesting duo. One, because it's fun, 2 brothers playing together, playing defensive ends. But 2, if Joey Bosa can return to form, that would be dynamic and absolutely unstoppable, duo of defensive ends. So if you're a 49ers fan, what are your thoughts on the potential of Joey Bosa Geez, cannot pronounce Bosa for some reason. What do you think the chances that Joey Bosa is going to end up in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, with his brother? Let me know your thoughts on all of that in the comments. All right, thank you so much for checking out this episode of Wicked Good Sports Podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe. We have videos all the time on this channel. Main channel is, of course, where you get everything, where we do video essays. Then we have Those Fake Nerds, which is gaming and pop culture nerd news. And finally, Better Radio, which is all of our other podcasts that don't include sports. So again, thank you so much for checking out everything, and we will see you in the next one.